All right, I guess we can get started here in a moment. I just want to make sure that everybody is actually here for push notifications. If you're here for embedding, it's been moved to later this afternoon to give them a little more time. It's all right. Hey, Eddie, Anise, quiet. Don't make me come over there, you two. You guys are bad influences. Jeez. These are the people I work with, right? It's great. Anyway, some of you may have met me yesterday. I'm Simon MacDonald. I work on the PhoneGap team, and here today we're going to talk about embedding push notifications capabilities into your applications. So what we're going to build today, show of hands, who was in the first workshop this morning by Holly, building the Star Trek application? So a few of you were in here. So what we're going to do is take that application and add push notification capabilities to it. So if you've already created that app, you'll pretty much be able to skip the first step. If you haven't, don't worry. It'll be pretty quick to get caught up to speed. All right. So basically, what we really want to learn is how to get push notifications into our apps and some of the different things that we can do, like how to handle pushes when your app is in the foreground, when it's in the background, how we can add more advanced features like action buttons. And of course, what everybody seems to want to do is get a push notification and immediately redirect to some other location in their app. So that's some of the stuff we're going to go through today. Basically, all of the slides in the workshop are available online at macdonald.github.io and pushworkshop.eu. So I'll tweet that out later, and we'll make sure that when Jen collects everything, you guys will get this in an email. So don't worry about it too much. So, okay, has everybody installed the PhoneGap developer app? Anyone not have that installed, I think is a better question. Okay, that's great, because if you have the PhoneGap developer app and the PhoneGap CLI installed, you should actually be able to follow along with everything I'm doing here today. So something that we're not covering today is how you go into Google and create a new project and give it push capabilities. There's all sorts of tutorials that will walk you through that, and it's not terribly difficult on Google side to add GCM integration to one of your Google projects. We're also not covering how to set up mobile provisioning profiles and certificates for Apple. There's all sorts of guides that take care of that, and it's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. And that's why we're not covering it today, because I don't have 7 hours to go through it. So anyway, moving right along. So the first thing that we're going to do is to set up our new project. And I just realized that if that's in full screen, we're not really going to be able to type at the same time. So bear with me for a moment. I do like how we're sort of like, it seems like in 1024 by 768 resolution here with the, no, too ugly. All right. Let's make a new drawer. All right, so basically the first thing we want to do is to create our new application. So like I said, if you're in Holly's workshop earlier, you can already use that project that you created. But those of you who weren't, if you just copy this line, which is PhoneGap create PG push, that is just the name of the application. And in this case, we're using a template. And the PhoneGap app Star Track is an NPM template, and it's also available on GitHub. So if we just copy that line and go ahead and create the new application. So it's going off and it's grabbing the template. And now if we go into our PG push directory, we can see we have a new PhoneGap application, and the www directory has all of the files that we need in order to get started on this. All right, so then we've navigated into the new PG push directory. And basically at this point in time, we want to make sure that everybody's connected to the network and they can actually serve up this application. So if you go back in here and we type PhoneGap serve, and that's going to basically start a web server from the terminal and allow you to get the entire contents of your application through the PhoneGap developer app. when you actually go to submit something to the App Store or the Play Store, obviously you won't be doing this, but this is a really good way of testing your application before you actually install it on a device. The fact that PhoneGap Serve is not running for me now is problematic, to say the least. You know, this is hubris, because as I was walking by Ryan in the previous thing and I made a joke about his simulator failing, this is why this happens. Wow. Did you ever see anything like this in Nice? It's like PhoneGap Serve isn't even really starting. No, let that play. Oh. No, I think it's a problem with the fact that I already have another console open in a different window. Now, well, see, I think we've all proven that I'm an idiot and you shouldn't listen to me, but we'll go from there. My coworkers already know that. So basically, if on your device right now you start the PhoneGap developer app, and for myself, if I go to that API, which I think somebody is already doing right now. It's okay. No, that's great. But basically, if you're following along yourself, you can run PhoneGap Serve on your own application. So I'm just going to take this in on my device and then let you guys see it. So basically, right now, the application is being downloaded from my desktop to my phone running inside the PhoneGap developer app. So I can see that we've got a socket connection there. And if I flip over to Visor, wow, that is, okay. Slightly worried about this. Kush had a problem with the H64 codec. They wanted money for it, so he switched around to using a totally different codec. And now, of course, yeah, it doesn't seem to want to display properly, but the application is running here. And that's why I always travel with more than one phone. So I'm basically right now, I'm just going to fall back on going to the iPhone and being able to display it through QuickTime here. Oh, this is just wonderful. Yeah, I'm also just trying to get the Wi-Fi. one of the things that we want to work on with the PhoneGap developer app is this process right here where I'm having to type in the IP address. It's kind of a pain in the butt. We're looking at ways to auto-discover that, or perhaps switch over to using a QR code that you can scan to make life a little bit easier. All right, so now my iPhone is downloading the application, and we can actually see what's going on because Microsoft, or no, it wasn't Microsoft. I forget who the corporation was that ended up suing Kush so that he had to switch to a different codec from H.264. Oh, come on. There we go. Extracting. So once the CSS applies here, we'll actually get to see the application. So, finally, that was supposed to be the easy part. So now we have the Star Trek application running inside the PhoneGap developer app, so we can kind of preview our application here and start to continue on. So has anyone actually gotten to this step? You probably got there a little faster than me. Yeah, Jesse did it. Thanks. All right. All right. From that point, once you go through this, you type in your address, and you get Star Trek up and running, then we're pretty much ready to proceed on to the next phase, which is putting push notification into your application. So, first thing that we need to do is obtain a registration ID. So it doesn't matter if you're using GCM or APNS, you still need to get a registration ID. And what we've done with the new PhoneGap push plugin is change the API so that it doesn't matter. You just call the init method, pass in all of your options, whether you're using Android, Windows, or iOS, and you'll get back a registration ID the same way through our registration event. So I'm just going to open up. You know what? I'm going to open the project that we just created in Atom, which is currently my favorite editor to be using. As soon as I find out where all right, pg.au, pg-push, open that. Okay, so now we have our project open, and of course I just minimize that. Great, and so everything that we're going to be working with today will be in the W directory. So what we want to do is if you go into the W directory inside the JS folder, there'll be a file called my-app.js. And from there, we just want to add a new function that's going to set up push. So if we take all of this code, and I'll go through it a little bit, and go over to our JS folder, myapp.js, and I'm just going to scroll all the way down to the bottom here and add that new function in. So what exactly is going on here? Well, first off, my mouse is, there we go. So in this function setup push, what we're doing, we're calling push notification init. Push notification init is the one that is going to take all of your options, figure out what operating system you're actually on, and then request a registration ID from GCM or from APNS or from, it's not Wins anymore, it's a different platform on Windows. And it's also where you can set up a number of options. In this case, you'll see that the Android sender ID is a bunch of X's. If you were setting up your own Android project on GCM, you would go in, get a new project ID from Google, and that is what you would use as the sender ID. For the purposes of what we're doing here today, because we're using the PhoneGap developer app, you can put in all X's. What the PhoneGap developer app actually does is intercepts that call to push notification init, removes whatever you put in for sender ID, and replaces it with the sender ID that we use for the PhoneGap developer app. So we kind of do a little kind of janky search and replace there for you. So you can put in anything you want there. You can have fun with it. And then on the other side, for iOS, these are the general options that you're always going to want to have. It's the sound alert and badge. That doesn't mean that every push notification that comes into iOS will have a sound, an alert, and a badge. but it gives you the option of playing a sound, the option of showing an alert, and the option of a badge being assigned to it. So when you're requesting push via iOS, you'll want to pretty much put these options in so that you have the ability to show or not show these things. And on Windows, it's pretty amazing. Windows, you don't have to put in any parameters whatsoever. The only reason we even have that in there is so that in the future, yes, we can support options, and two, we want people to know front and center that this plugin also supports Windows. So looking at this code a bit more, after the init is called, what we want to do is set up an event listener, in this case for a registration event. So once there's a response from GCM or APNS, our plugin gets called on the native side. We figure out what the registration ID is, and then we call your registration event handler. So it's just a function here. Basically, all you'll really see is this console log where we're printing out what your registration ID is. And that will become important because we'll need it in order to be able to push data to our application. But what I've also done here is just show you a little bit of what you want to do with regards to the registration ID. First off, we're taking a look at what the old registration ID is to see if the application was run before, and we're comparing it to what we've just had. So I'm using local storage from this. If you were at the PhoneGap Day talk yesterday, Carrie told you not to ever use local storage. I'm right now just using it for convenience sake because we're just going to run the app a few times. But what you want to do here is if there is no old registration ID, or if the new registration ID you got is different from the old one, you need to update your backend server. So if you don't do that, you just won't be able to push anymore. So it's going to be your responsibility either through another push service like Ionic Push, or PushWush, or Urban Airship, or Amazon SNS, or something that you write yourself to maintain these registration IDs. So in this if statement here, this is basically where you'd be telling Amazon what your registration ID is. You'd be calling a method on Ionic Push to let it know what your registration ID is. So it's very important to be able to always call init and always have a registration event listener, because your registration ID may change at any time. One of the weird things is iOS and Android, they will invalidate these IDs periodically just to kind of refresh everything, because you can imagine how many times people register just even in developing, and then people don't actually really want those pushes. So they have millions and millions of IDs in there, and I'd say a large percentage of them are probably invalid. So they'll just kind of wipe the slate clean every once in a while and give you a completely new token. So you have to be able to handle that. And then finally, just wanted to put in an event handler for any errors that come in on the registration process. Again, nothing too fancy here. We're just gonna do some console logging. So we're all set up to be able to handle push. There's only one thing. We actually have to call this method at some point in time. And when do you guys think we should call this method? Anybody? All right. Before device ready, Jesse, that's just silly, but thank you for playing along. No, obviously, you do not want to call this until you get the device ready event. If you try to call any Cordova, any PhoneGap commands before you get the device ready event, it's going to fail because the native side is not set up yet. So what we want to do is we want to find the device ready method. There we go. So again, this is a Framework 7 application template that we're using, and this is where we are registering an event listener for device ready. So as soon as we see that the device is ready, we know that the bridge between the JavaScript side and the native side is set up. All of the code on the native side is loaded, so we can safely call setup push. And that will take care of going off and doing all the registration stuff with APNS. All right, so that's great. That's the wrong window. So unfortunately, as soon as I save that code into the editor, you probably would have seen this application get refreshed because it detected that some code had changed and it just did a hot reload of it. So what we also need to do is define our PG push window, and you can see that I have successfully gotten a registration event. Problem is, how many people are attached to my IP address right now? We got one. Anybody else? Okay, because the fun thing is figuring out which one of these registration events is actually for my device. I'm going to guess that it is the one 4434, but I'm going to do the 3-finger tap in order to refresh the application, and let's just check that again. All right. Are you got an Android device? No. Okay. So I can already tell by that registration ID with this part and then the colon, that is somebody's Android device. That's yours? Okay, cool. So we can push to you as well. So I'm just going to reload the application so I can see exactly what my registration ID is. And I believe it's going to be this one. So let me just put that off there for a second so we don't get confused with everyone else. All right, so going back over here. So one thing that you didn't see when I reloaded the application was this dialog here, which the first time you run any application on iOS and it requests push, the operating system will pop up a dialog like this. So obviously I've been testing push on this application for a while. It didn't give me that. So you'll see that. Please, if you're trying this at home, please press the OK button. If you don't, you have to jump through literal hoops, actually, in order to clear off that question and go back and get push notifications to come in. There's actually, I think I linked to, yeah, there's actually a spot on the Apple's documentation site which tells you what to do in order to reset this value. And it's basically reboot your phone, uninstall the application, reboot your phone, set it a day ahead, reboot your phone, set it a day back, reboot your phone, install the application. So it needs your phone has to go into the future to say that this value is no longer needed, and then you put it back to present time, you can reinstall the application and you can get a registration ID. So whatever you do, don't click the don't allow button is what I'm trying to get across, because it's a pain. Also, for this workshop, we're not doing anything fancy when it comes to the user interface. As soon as we get to device ready, we're immediately calling setup push in order to just keep things flowing. My recommendation to all of you, if you're building a real application with push notifications, what you want to do is to explain to your users why they should click OK in this dialog box. You want to give them kind of a preamble first to say, like, oh, these are the benefits of allowing push notifications to be sent to your device. Because people, the number one reason that people will uninstall your application is annoying push notifications. And another one of the reasons is just not, respecting your users' time and privacy. So you'll really want to actually upfront say, hey, this is the benefit it brings. Please allow me to send you push notifications before you let the operating system go ahead and do that. As well, you may want to let your users kind of have some time in the application first before you even give them that kind of dialogue. Like, let them like your app before you start asking them for stuff. And we find that that really increases the amount of people who will say OK to this dialogue. And it's amazing because I think it's just under 40% of people say OK on iOS, but it's just over 60% on Android that allow push notifications. Because on Android, there is no such dialogue, so people don't have to say OK, and so push notifications just come in no matter what, and they have to go hunting in the settings in order to stop it from coming in to their application. But please be cognizant of your users' time. Don't abuse push notifications. So, like I said, once we get through that, we'll see in the console log a registration event. Obviously, the registration that you see will be different, but we're all set. There's a couple of useful resources here. I know Holly had links to them as well in her session, and it's like how to debug using Safari or Chrome, which is very useful when getting into some of this stuff. So what we didn't do to our project here is add the push notification plugin itself. It's because the PhoneGap developer app already has it included, so you don't need to do that for the purposes of this workshop. But when you're building your own app, this is how you would do it. And so what you're seeing here is the standard way that you would add any other plugin, but you'll notice you have to pass in a variable. And in this case, the variable is your GCM sender ID. If you're only targeting iOS and you plan on using APNS, you can make that sender ID whatever you want. It won't affect your app at all. But if you're using GCM on Android or even GCM on iOS, which the plugin also supports, you want to put in your proper sender ID. You may say, well, why do you have to do that? Because in your init method, Simon, you're already adding it in there. This is legacy. That is the way that it works today. Right now we're at release 1.63 of the push plugin. 1.7 should come out fairly soon. But once I go to 2.0, that sender ID from the Android section will be gone. It will only be able to be set it when you're installing the plugin. The reason that we need it at that point in time is there is a file that I have to write to on Android to keep GCM from complaining. And if you're using GCM on iOS, I have to set it to a plist. And I can't do that at runtime. I have to do that at compile time. So that's just a heads up that this way of specifying the sender ID is deprecated and will be going away in 2.0, which is probably sometime late this year. So now, we've got a registration ID. That's great. Now we have to actually handle notifications itself. So going back into your myapp.js, we're going to add a new event listener, this time for the notification event. So anytime your app's running, if it receives a push notification, this JavaScript event handler is going to get called. So let's go back in here. So underneath the error method, the error event handler, I'm just going to add in my notification event handler. So again, nothing really fancy here. All I'm doing is taking in the data that comes back from the push notification. I'm going to log something in the console just so we can see it. But also, I'm going to display an alert up on the screen. And I'm using the PhoneGap dialogues plugin in order to have a fancier alert dialog. Because the basic alert dialog in JavaScript doesn't allow you to provide a title, so on iOS you get index.html. So anyway, in this case, we're going to use the message from the push notification and the title from the push notification. Should really close some of this stuff. All right. So if you already had the application up, you should use the 4-finger tap in order to refresh it. So now when I send a push notification to this application, you'll see on Android we'll get hello world, and on iOS we'll get hello world as well. And if you actually put the app in the background, it's going to look like this. You're going to get something in the notification shade. And then once you click on it, it's opening up the app, and then it's calling your notification handler for you. So that's all well and good, but how do I actually get the how do I actually get to send a push notification? And that's actually our next step here. So just recently, I believe with the 6.2 release of the PhoneGap CLI, we've added a new command. It's called PhoneGap push. And what it allows you to do is to send a payload to our push notification service, which will then relay it to the PhoneGap developer app running your application. So this is strictly for testing purposes. You can only target one device at a time. You'll never be able to use this in production, but it's a really good way for you to get started using push, test your functionality before you go through the trouble of setting up a Google project or getting all your certificates on iOS set up. So let's give that a try. The only problem with bringing I'm going to try to get these guys on the same screen so we can actually see what's going on here. So if I type PhoneGap, and I can't ever type properly. So PhoneGap push, and then I'm going to pass in the device ID, and that's what you got back in the registration event. And then I need a payload to be able to send to the device. And in this case, we have a very simple one. No, actually, sorry. First thing I need is my service. And that's one of two values, GCM for sending to Android devices or APNS to send to Apple devices. All right, so once I've got the service in there, we have a very simple payload. Whoops. I should really be copying it from the example that I provided for myself. So we have examples of what payload to send for Android and for iOS devices. So let me just backtrack here a little bit. So if all goes according to plan, as soon as I click this, it's going to communicate with our push notification service, then go off to Apple's APNS, communicate with it, and then have APNS deliver it to my device here, and you guys should be able to see it on the screen. That's if everything goes well. That did not go well at all. Yeah, is that all it was? All right, let me. Oh, yeah, I'm missing. Okay. Oh my God, it worked. That's great. Wow. That's nice. I'm actually quite happy because that's going to a service we've got running in San Francisco, I think, right now. So we've actually yes. Yeah, I noticed that too. Yeah. Yeah, it should. Oh, did I copy? Yeah, I copied the wrong. I keep doing that. Right. Oh, sorry. Probably getting vertigo watching me flip back and forth between these things. All right. So okay to that. And then no, there's definitely something. Is it? Yeah. Well spotted. Was that you, Tim? All right, great. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, send a pull request to that repo to fix that, or I will do it later. All right, so yes, I sent the wrong data. I sent an Android payload to an iOS device, so it wasn't able to figure it out. So now that we've sent an iOS payload, we're actually seeing hello world. Yay, okay. So what I wanted to kind of mention, and I should go back one screen here. In the alert dialog, I'm pulling out data.message and data.title. If you were to go to the PhoneGap push repository, you would see that there are a number of what I like to call first-class citizens, and that's the title, the message, the sound, and the count. So those are 4 elements that you can always, that will always be set on data. So you'll always have a title, message, sound, and count. Anything else will be under an object called additional data. So if you're sending along some custom parameters, those will get added into the additional data object. So that way we can actually write a notification handler that will work on Android and iOS because all of the data gets normalized. If not, you get into some pretty hairy code in order to like extract the message from the APNS payload or from the GCM payload. So whenever possible, I've tried to normalize this stuff. A couple of other things that you can generally count on, and we'll talk about one of them later, is the foreground and the cold start properties, but they're currently under additional data. They're well supported enough now that I'm thinking about moving them to the main data object so that people can always expect those to be there. So all right, we actually got a push notification to my device. That is making me super happy. All right, yes? Yes. So let me try to unpack some of that. So first off, it's kind of a misnomer that I call it a device ID. It's more or less an application ID, so that it uniquely identifies your application running on that device. So it's a one-to-one mapping between that particular installation of your app on this device. But I believe what you were asking is you would have a device with an application with multiple users. Yeah, that. Yeah, it's actually rather difficult to support that use case because most manufacturers think of it as a one-to-one mapping between the device and a user. Android has a concept of multi-user where you can set up different spaces on your Android devices. So I know that I have set up a guest user account for my daughter to be able to play all of her video games. Your question is a little bit involved. I have seen some people. Actually, what they do is have the user log into their application, and then when they log out, it's going to unregister with the push notification service to invalidate that token. So that's something that we can do. But let's talk about that in one of the breaks today. All right. So has anyone else actually tried to send a push notification to their device while we're sitting here? Did it work for you? Awesome. Anybody else? Okay. Cool. This is turning out quite well after an inauspicious start. All right, so now that we got a push notification sent to our device, let's kind of look at handling things a little bit better. One of the foremost things that people want to do is to be able to handle background notifications. So what you're seeing here, it's a UI component, so it's only going to be useful when the application is running so that you can pop up that alert dialog. But quite frequently, you want to handle something in the background. And what we're able to do is to set a parameter in the push payload in order to have that notification event handler called even when the application is in the background, which is great if you need to do some refreshing of the data in the application. Perhaps you have like a news site application so that a news story breaks, you push it out to the device, you tell the device to go and download that, and then you send them a push notification that says, oh, hey, there's a breaking news story. And they click on it, and instantaneously, that story is already loaded on their device. So you look like a hero because your application is that responsive, that they don't have to wait to download anything. So if I go over to our console, you can see this particular line here. This is our notification event. So that's from our onNotification listener. Basically, I'm just doing a console.log to show that things are coming in. But what I want to do here is send another push notification when the app is in the background. So I'll put the app in the background, send a push. Everything seems to be working okay. But we see the push notification. See, it just appeared in the notification shade, but I'm not seeing anything in our console log at all. But when I go ahead and click on this, oh, somebody's jumping ahead. That's pretty cool. So if I go ahead and add that, oh, that was weird. Code has changed. Great. Yeah, so it started up the application, called the onNotification event handler, and we will see the console.log. But what we really want to be able to do is to get that notification event listener to run when the app is in the background. All right, I keep clicking that like it's actually going to do something. Boy, I'm dumb. So if we go down here and we see that we have to make some slight modifications to our onNotification event handler. So on iOS, on Android, it doesn't matter. Push comes in the background, Android will basically just find your code and run it. On iOS, it actually matters. It'll wake up your application if it's not running, and it'll give you up to 30 seconds of runtime for you to handle a background task. If you go longer than 30 seconds, iOS is going to get very upset with your application and may kill it. So you don't want that to happen. The way that we're actually able to tell iOS that we're done with our background task is by calling the push.finish method. So that just tells the native side to go ahead and say, all right, we're done. You can tell the operating system not to kill us. So what we need to do is just copy in this code, go back to our editor, and in the on notification event handler, just add in push.finish. It's not that fancy. For Android, you can put this method in, and it's not going to affect anything at all. It's just a no-op on Android and on Windows. So let's just add that in. And now, if we refresh our application, which I think it probably already did, great. We're going to put the app into the background, and now we're going to set the proper bit in the payload to tell it to deliver this in the background. So you can see right here our payload in the data object on Android. There's a new property called content available, and we set it to 1. The event listener on Android will find this and say, okay, that's cool, I need to call the JavaScript side. On iOS, it's basically the same thing. In our alert, we set content available equal to 1. The thing that you need to be aware of on Android, we need to quote it with strings. On iOS, it's just a straight number. So now, if I go back over here, oops. All right, so I'm going to set content available equal to 1. Oh, this is why I wanted to use Visor. So sadly, you guys, all right, there. So I had put the application in the background, and I guess it didn't pick it up there. So I'm going to go ahead and send this push notification. It says it received it. We saw it in the shade, and what it actually should be showing us on this side, and it's not, is that there is a notification event being fired. So I don't know if it's because multiple people are connected or not, but trust me, when I tested this myself, it worked just fine. So let's just pretend everything's good. Like, yeah, right, somebody else is connecting. But basically, what it allows you to do is to just run arbitrary code when your app is in the background. So it's pretty handy. So what we should have seen is, even though that push notification came in and I didn't interact with it, we saw the background event. Yes? Did I do that? Did I do that wrong? Yes, I did exactly what I said not to do. All right, so let's try sending that again. No, I think it, yeah, not to blame other people, but I do think it has something to do with having multiple people connected to the same IP address. I can promise you, though, it works. I know I don't have a lot of credibility with you guys at this point, but try it at home, and I'm sure you'll be pretty happy. So anyway, so one of the interesting things you have about these background notifications is you still saw that it came into the notification shade. So that's nice. But if you do not provide title and body elements, or the title and message elements, depending upon what platform it is, it won't end up in the notification shade. So basically, you're sending information to your application without informing your user, which is actually pretty useful if you think about the case that I talked about earlier. You have some sort of update that you want to download to your application, whether it's data in the form of a news story, or if you're using our content sync plugin or the code push plugin from Microsoft, actually be able to update your application on the fly. So imagine this. Send a background push notification, and you do not have any title or body, so it comes in silently to your application. And you basically tell your app, go off and get the latest version, downloads the latest version without any interaction from the user whatsoever, so that the next time they start your application, they have your brand new interface. Or imagine you found like a horrible bug and you need to get it fixed as quickly as possible and you don't want to go through the 2-day app store review process, you can actually modify some JavaScript, get it pushed out to your application silently, and users will never have to interact with it. They won't need to go into the App Store and say, yeah, let's get that update. So there's a lot of great things you can do using background notifications, and especially silent background notifications. All right, any questions before I go on? Okay. So to get a little bit fancier, we're going to add some action buttons. So you've seen that. I'm assuming a lot of people use the Gmail app either on Android or iOS. No, wait, I live in that thing. So basically, when you get a new notification there, if you pull down on the shade, or in Android's case, the buttons are already there, you can already archive or reply to that message. So that is a great piece of functionality that you have on native applications, and we can bring that to hybrid as well. So what we're going to do is to set up our Android and iOS devices in order to be able to do action buttons. Now, you'll notice for iOS, we now have this new section to add to init called categories. The way that iOS works is that you have to know at startup time what possible action buttons are going to be displayed in your application. So you have to think about that when you deploy your app. So you have to go through all of your use cases. Android is way more ad hoc. The action buttons that get displayed are whatever you put in the push payload. So you can do some amazing things on that. So I'm going to grab this category section, and I'm going to go back into our application code and look for the init section. And for iOS, I'm going to remember to put the comma in because that would probably screw us up. And so I'm going to add in a couple of just one category with 2 buttons. I keep doing that. All right, so the category is called New Music. That title is important because when you send the push to Apple, you need to tell it which category to use. We could have multiple categories in here if we wanted to have like album releases or whatever else you wanted to have. You can put in as many categories as you want. Each category can have up to 3 buttons. The buttons have to be labeled yes, no, and maybe in the data object. So that's your positive response button, your negative response button, and a 3rd button that I don't think they figured out what to call. The callback, this is the function that you want executed when the user presses the button. In our case, it's going to be the play music function that I'm going to just add right into the application. But if you had a function in another object, you could just like have app.playMusic or whatever else you wanted to. So you're not limited to actually putting the function in the global namespace, but for the sake of this workshop, that's all that we're going to do. The title, of course, is the text that's going to be displayed when the push notification arrives. And foreground, it's a Boolean variable, true or false. So in this case, when I would press the positive button here, foreground is true. That's actually going to start up my application for me. So it's going to bring my app to the foreground. That's what that means. If foreground is false, basically your action button is going to call the event it's going to invoke the callback that's associated with that button, but it's going to leave your app in the background, so the user doesn't ever need to see your app. And then destructive, it's kind of funny because destructive doesn't actually mean anything bad. It just means that iOS will color the button red if you set destructive to true. So that's just supposed to be a warning to the user that the action could possibly have some long-lasting consequences. So think if you have an email application and you provide a delete button, so you would make that red so you let the users know that they could be deleting an email message. So that's basically what we needed to change in order to set up iOS. And now we're going to get a couple of really super simple callbacks, which are only going to show alert dialogues because I'm super lazy. All right, just going to paste those into the bottom of our myapp.js file. So now that we got those, I'm going to, well, the application I believe already refreshed, but just do that again anyway. All right, so at this point in time, we're ready to send a push notification and have action buttons show up. You can see what I was talking about. When you send on Android, it's pretty much up to you what you send for the action buttons. So in this case, we have a new parameter called actions, and it's going to be an array of buttons. So for Android, you can set the icon. The icon is going to go look in your res drawables folder on Android to try to find an icon with that name. So if you deploy a play button and an archive button in this case, it'll go and display those as part of the application. Sadly, because we're using the PhoneGap developer app and I don't know what your assets are ahead of time, you probably won't see icons on Android, but when you develop your own applications, you will. Of course, the title is exactly the same, and the callback is exactly the same as it would be on iOS. It's the function to call when the button is pressed. So if you were doing a